The Juneau World Affairs Council and the University of Alaska Southeast, in collaboration with KTOO, present the 2023 World Affairs Forum, Immigration, Detention, and Power, Addressing Bias and Prejudice. In this session, the panel of 5 experts, Professor Warren Binford, Dr. William Arrocha, Heidi Cerneka, Ari Cowan, and Dr. Mayra Kimmel discuss the topics from their presentations by diving deeper into the issues with the audience and each other.
Welcome back to the Juneau World Affairs Council Forum for 2023. We're concluding the entire event with a forum with our speakers. And I want to begin by introducing myself, but then I want to have each of the speakers reintroduce themselves for any viewers or any audience members who might have just joined us. So my name is Aparna Palmer. I am the new chancellor of UAS, University of Alaska Southeast. I come here most recently from Colorado, where I've spent much of my life, but I am an immigrant. I am originally from India. My family and I immigrated to the United States halfway through my childhood. We came right to Colorado. After finishing half of my childhood in Colorado Springs, I went to Colorado State University, where I received a degree in English and one in biology. My first job after finishing my undergraduate degrees was to work at an English immersion center in eastern Colorado. Turns out eastern Colorado, especially Morgan County, Colorado, is one of the most diverse counties in the state of Colorado. And it was my honor and pleasure to run the English immersion program there to help migrants from all over the world, Central America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, just really get some facility in English so that they could live out their lives productively there. After that, I pursued a PhD in the state of Washington. My PhD is in marine invertebrate zoology. After I graduated, I took on a professorship in Western Colorado, which does not have an ocean currently, but it did. It did have an ancient ocean, and so I was the sole marine biologist in Western Colorado, but really enjoyed introducing my students to the marine environment by taking them on trips to the Pacific Northwest. I specialize in the organisms that live on the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States. After working as a professor of biology for about 22 years and having taken on an assistant vice president position at my university, I went to the other side of the mountains. So I was in Western Colorado, back to the east side of the mountains, took a vice president position at the largest community college in Colorado, Front Range Community College. I was there for 2 years before I saw this wonderful position, applied for it, and just moved here about 3.5 months ago. So I have migrated. Well, so it is my pleasure to welcome the members of our forum. And what I want to do is I want each of them to quickly introduce themselves. If you could each give us your name and your area or profession, we can get kind of reintroduced to you, and then we'll jump into the questions for today.
Okay, my name is Ari Cowan. I'm originally from Seattle, and I'm now in Louisville. When I moved out to Louisville, they asked me if I was going the wrong way. I am a theorist, and I am the Director General of the International Center for Compassionate Organizations in Louisville that has affiliations in Ireland and England, Greece, France, and Kuala Lumpur. And that's pretty much it.
Good evening. My name is William Arrocha. I'm a professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. I'm an immigrant to this country, and I'm a migrant in Alaska. Thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Good afternoon. Well, hello. I guess it depends on what time you're watching this. My name is Heidi Cerneka. I am currently an immigration attorney in El Paso, Texas. I've lived 22 years in Brazil, Kenya, and Belize. as a human rights activist.
Hello, my name is Mara Kimmel, and I currently serve as the Executive Director of the ACLU of Alaska. I'm a former immigration attorney and former faculty member of University of Alaska in Anchorage, where I taught political science and immigration law, international law, and constitutional law.
Hi, my name is Warren Binford, and I am a children's rights scholar and advocate. I'm a professor of pediatrics and a professor of law at the University of Colorado.
All right, thank you so much. So I'm going to kind of introduce each question to you, and then I will let you decide whether you would like to respond to it. So the first question is, originally this event was scheduled for March 2020. What is the same and what is different since 2020 in your view? Would anyone like to jump in?
I just wanted to note, and I'd forgotten to make, I'm glad you asked that question. I'd forgotten to make this comment. I forget who said there were 108 million refugees on the planet right now. Is that you? Displaced people on the planet right now. When we first had this scheduled, it was, I think the number was 85 million.
Wow.
And I just say that to highlight the immediacy and the presence of these dynamics.
The conference was on border, and what happens at the border. And I do have to say that, unfortunately, at least the U.S.-Mexico border is even more closed than it was prior to COVID and when we were going to have this conversation. So that's not necessarily the best news that we want to share, but it's a reality that we have to contend and we have to deal with it.
I think one thing that's changed is presidents. What hasn't changed is our border. And I mean, for what that's worth, I think it just makes it much clearer to us that we have to be the ones to make the change happen.
All right, thank you. Your second question is, a lot of the work that you do is really difficult. It's emotionally very heavy. What do you do to take care of yourselves?
Work. No, and I say that with a fair amount of intentionality, because one thing I've discovered about myself is that when things feel out of control, I do better if I can actively contribute to bringing them under control. Yeah. That even if it's me sitting with one child, seeing them, hearing them, letting them know that I'm sorry they're going through what they're going through, then I feel better in coping with the chaos. And there is a healing process that was described by Ari earlier, which I see as a transfer of spirit between two people when we meet physically at a place and time, and they are in pain, and we can acknowledge their pain and tell them that we're sorry they're going through that, and to give them space in which they can tell their story. And so, for me, absolutely, I love spending time, with my family and loved ones, and, try and spend time in nature and do all of those things that our medical professionals recommend. This is good for you. But as an individual, I've discovered that part of what helps me to be healthy is to be active in trying to do good in the world. So that way I feel better in that moment in time than if I were just taking a hike. But sometimes I do just need to take a hike.
I can understand that, that sense of agency where you can do something, comfort someone, listen to someone's story. And I think even listening to a person's story is so powerful an experience for that person, because many people who go through the trauma that is associated with migration don't have people that they can share their stories with. So I do think that it is healing for them, but I'm also glad that it gives you some comfort. Any other thoughts?
I went through the pandemic where they had the Asian flu when I was 11, and I got it. And the way they had to treat it is they had to leave 2-gallon jugs of water and get out of there because they could be infected. And so I spent time alone on one of those beds that folds out from the couch, and came this close, hallucinated terribly, felt pain. And when it broke like that, and I never felt so good in my whole life. Although everything was soaked, they had to burn the mattress and so on. So when this pandemic came, it shook me at first, but I thought, well, read history and what human beings have gone through. We're going through something now, and then write. And I spent some time not just doing my technical stuff, but began writing fiction. Now, there's some people claim my academic work is fictitious, which is, that could be. But I started writing a story of a boy who could talk to whales in a book, and it looks like it's going to go, called The Whale Speaker, and who had suffered abuse and so on. So seeing the history and being in something that where there's time to have a fantasy and just pursue it, I found to be really handy. And I test as severe introvert, although it may not appear that way. The humor and stuff that I have is purely defensive. I mean, I'm right now, don't I look calm and collected? I'm utterly terrified right now. And so what I do is I'll talk, because if they're talking, it's safe. And so it was a time of reflection, and also a time of talking to people who were terrified by this, and just knowing that people, if they could just talk about it and say, you know, humanity has been through things. Here we go again. We'll be probably all right. So it was a wonderful time for reflection and getting the lessons of history, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I do think your points about history and about art are really,
for sure.
really
Yeah.
critical. Thank you. Any other comments? Any other ways in which you cope with the heaviness of this area, this topic?
I walk. Kind of compulsively, perhaps. But I really appreciate what you said, Warren, because I do think it's about touching other human beings, right? And when I sit down and I hear someone's story, or when I was in Brazil, I worked with incarcerated women, and I would go in every Saturday and hang out on the patio with them and hear their stories. And they're the most resilient people, you know. When you take everything away from someone and they're still resilient, and I often think I would be like, and they were very faith-based, and I'd be like, I'm so done with God. Like, what, you know, it gives me hope too.
Well, and it's not just that it gives you hope, but it gives them hope. Like,
Yeah.
I love going into a situation where, you know, kids have traveled for days and endured unimaginable, you know, challenges and barriers, and they come to the United States and they are treated in ways that, I'm sorry, are and should be fundamentally un-American. And that I can say to them, I'm sorry that happened to you. They weren't supposed to do that to you. Do you want me to tell the judge what they did? Because that was wrong. You know, that is not the way that we're supposed to treat children in the United States of America. And so then I can give them hope by affirming that their dream of America could be real, and that what they experienced was un-American. And so I love that give and take to, you know, both hear their story and, you know, witness their resilience, but also give them, you know, hope that what they came for and what they expected to see is in fact our ideal and what we're supposed to be working towards.
And I want to add, and for me also, they would say, like, and to give them value, you know. I'm not invisible because you came here. And in fact, they would also say, like, and you're here on a Saturday morning and no one's paying you to be here?
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way because we're equal in the world, right? But to them, it's saying, I must be a valuable person. And yeah.
Well, and there's another element to that is that there is that you and I, for better or for worse, we look American.
Right.
That we are white women, and we have certain privileges as as to our presentation and then our education as attorneys. And so to take that presentation of power and to put it in a role of support and service to them, it can have an immense positive impact on how they feel like they're being perceived in this new country. And so I think it's really important for us to, offer ourselves to lift them up and to lift up their stories.
And then it lifts us up.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's part of that healing process that we all need to continue to go into these really difficult spaces of injustice and to have the strength to continue to serve.
Quantum physics.
Yeah, it's quantum physics, as Mara says.
Yeah.
And I think we have to work on teams.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how solo attorneys do it. We have to work on teams because then we lift each other up. And also I think we challenge each other when we're doing something stupid or wrong or...
This isn't necessarily in response to your specific question, but I just want to build on what everybody's saying. And again, bring it back to Alaska. We're 700,000 people, which means that we can pick up a telephone and pretty much call everybody we know. And the ability then to impact on a person's life, to make them feel seen and heard, and hope, to build hope because somebody is showing up for you, is really profound in our state, which gives me incredible hope that by showing up and by continuing to partner with organizations and get to know people through all kinds of things is probably the most critical thing that any of us can do. And to really answer your question, one of the most fun things I've done is cook. And cooking brings culture together. And I've learned so much. In Anchorage, we've got people, again, from all over. And what's been fascinating to watch is people bringing their seeds we've got Arctic cilantro growing in Anchorage, and people sharing experiences and cultures over food. It's the lighter part of what you've described, and it's just as important and just as engaging to come together around tables.
When I think that really speaks, Mara, to the importance of us not giving up on each other. That community, as Ari pointed out, is one of the greatest strengths of humanity. And when we don't talk to each other, when we don't listen to each other, then we surrender that strength. And when you stay in community, when you stay in relationship, even when it's difficult, even when people say things that you think are hurtful, even when people say things that you think are bigoted, but you stay in relationship with them, it gives you the power to mobilize that community and to provide support for those who enter into our community without any relationship, because suddenly you are not just offering yourself, but you're offering the support of others, and it could be dozens or it could be hundreds depending on the size of your community, but that in turn is what will accelerate their integration and their adaptation to their new homeland. And so it's critically important for us to stay in relationship with each other so that we then have more than just our individual selves to offer to people who are new to our communities.
I'm going to be honest when it comes to the question was taking care of myself, right?
Yes.
So for me to do the things that are shared by all of you, I really need to take care of myself a lot, to have that energy and the strength to do what you were saying and others. So for me, teaching, my university's teaching, right? Teaching for me is taking care of myself. I love what I do. So I don't go into a classroom thinking, oh my God, this is my job. Quite the opposite, right? I love it. So I'm
You
taking
go in
care.
going, oh my God, this is my
I-
job.
Every class is different. Every class is amazing. I work in an institute that is international. We are trilingual in our courses. So it's taking care of myself. I'm a loving husband. So for me, if I cannot give that love to my wife and to my children, I don't know how I can give it to others. So for me, when I get home, I'm the one who cooks at home every day. So every day there's a different meal. So that means that I have to be not just 10 minutes in the kitchen, I have to be like maybe 30 minutes or more, because I really have to I do French cooking, Mexican cooking, Italian cooking, because of my origins, right? And they kind of demand it. They're like, well, today we were going to do Italian, right? So, well, yes, okay, we'll adjust the menu. That's important for me, because, again, if I don't do that and show my family that I do that, how can I go with the other communities in Salinas, for example, and help them out? I am an avid competitor when it comes. I do competitive road biking. For me, it's important because it just keeps me in that zone. It reminds me that I am a human being, that I'm very far from God, right? Very far. So I bike every week, like 80 miles, and at a competitive level. It keeps me healthy. I need to be healthy to take care of others, right? It keeps me even spiritually healthy. I'm like you, an avid walker. My wife and me walk 4 miles every day. So the point I'm trying to get across is, and I read every night, so what I do is I have novels. Yeah, I really do fiction. I don't do nonfiction in the evenings. And so every night I divide my books by, one day French, one day English, one day Spanish, one day Portuguese, one day Italian. And I know I get a little crazy, but I have to do it because, again, my universe is the class, where if I don't communicate my students the feelings and the emotions and the intellectual, who else is going to keep spreading that word, right? And then, of course, in the weekends, I do work with communities around Monterey, which we have, as you know, we have the Central Valley, which has a huge immigration. But yeah, I believe that, and I want to live many, many more years. So I really want to keep taking care of myself as much as I can. So that's the honest answer that I can give you.
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed hearing all of your answers. And as I was kind of listening to everybody, I was trying to sort of draw themes there. And, one of the things that I was thinking about last night, because I went to a presentation on brain health, is what is healthy for your body, what is healthy for your brain. And some studies have shown that doing something, whether it is in concert with a community or whether it is in solitude, that is very different from the work that you pursue as your profession or your passion, that is critical for your health physically, emotionally, mentally. And so I think all of the answers that you've given are really about getting that sense of healing in many different ways, but really allowing yourself a break from the direct work, whether it's, doing the wonderful teaching that you do, whether it's walking, whether it's having, a gathering where you invite people to share food with you, all of those things in addition to kind of the fulfillment that you get from your work, I really can see really keep you going. So I know that I speak for many people who are here, but also who are joining us remotely. The people who are here and are listening to this session virtually, they are more than people who want information. They want to know how they can help. Even if they live very far away from some of the areas that you directly work in, some of the areas where the greatest amount of migration and trauma is occurring, they want to know, how can they help? What is something that they can do? And I know this has come up before in at least one session, but just all of you together, what are some pieces of advice you would give if someone really wants to help do something?
There are a series of organizations working along the southern border. A few years ago, I went with a delegation of folks from Anchorage and from Juneau, and we went to a detention center, which was life-changing in a lot of the ways I think that you heard from Warren, and we only went once. But there are so many organizations doing work that are crying out for volunteers right now, specifically out of San Diego. And so if you're able to go and volunteer there, please get in touch with me and I can connect you with the folks that are coordinating that. But even if you can't, there are opportunities to share your online time or your donations. And there's a number of really critical organizations doing that work, including Lawyers for Good Government, El Otro Lado, and I'm sure that you all can name a gazillion.
Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center.
Exactly, sorry. Yeah, and frankly, the ACLU of San Diego has just put out a call for anybody and everybody to come to San Diego because the service providers there are just stretched so thinly that we're trying to figure out if we can send another delegation down that way. But there are so many organizations, and I'm happy to refer people to sort of clearinghouses for that. And that's just on our southern border. Obviously, there are crises springing up, unfortunately, all over the globe. And so just engaging and getting on people's listservs and understanding what's happening and educating yourselves about the complexities. And then also, I think, figuring out ways that you can carry the complexities inside of you and the devastating things that are going on around the planet alongside some sense of hope. And so that's also the work that I think we all need to do individually and then be able to share, again, that work with the people who are on the front lines and doing the work and showing the support in any ways that we can.
And I definitely think that goes back to how do we do this in community? Because otherwise we will just go down a very dark spiral where we kind of just give up. But I like to say, normally I would say learn Spanish, super important. Maybe here it's learn a different language, but learn another language or try to learn another language. Run for office. Like, we need people in office that have vision and either fearlessness or have fear but run anyway. Encourage other people to run for office, right? In a time where we have 2 front-running candidates who are 80?
Yes.
Encourage other, mentor people, right? Like, let's mentor people to run for office. I think those are extremely important. Learn a lot, and then the other thing I was engage in dialogue, and engage in dialogue with people that think differently, right? It's really easy for me to engage in dialogue with all of you, right? But we need to engage in real dialogue with people that think differently, and whoever said that, like that whole, help me understand why you think that, right? Because I do really believe most of us want security and safety and because if we don't engage in that, how do we expect other people to listen to us, engage in dialogue with us? And how do we end up creating something that we could only imagine before?
And in doing that, I want to elevate what William was saying. When William described his relationship with his wife and his family, what I heard is that he's engaged in the daily practice of love. And it doesn't matter if you're married or not. It doesn't matter whether you have children. We all have people in our lives. And if we intentionally take care of them, then we are used to being loving, we're used to being positive, we're used to being affirming, we're used to allowing people into our space and our lives and create moments for being together that then we are in the habit of extending to other people, you know, outside of our family or outside of the communities that we've created. But we have to be used to, we have to be in the habit of loving interactions. And so let me hold up that even if you don't have the time to go down the border, we haven't mentioned donations, but almost all of these organizations are nonprofits. And so if you can't go down and you want to support them financially in some way, if you aren't in a position to run for office, just practicing being a loving human being on a daily basis with whoever is in your daily life will then prepare you for those moments when you need to make a decision, when you need to cast a vote, that you're more likely to cast a compassionate vote if you're not in that dark space that calls to all of us, especially in challenging times.
And you make it, I think, infectious. You infect them with sanity. Terrible thing that is. And I think you can do it generational in your families. I have 2 sons, and one of them is a doctor, and we always talked about compassion and so on. And he found out that there was a little girl, 4 months old, in Nazareth, Ethiopia, dying. And he said, well, I could use another kid. So he flew over there, and they brought this little girl out. Her name was Kalkidan, which is Ethiopian for God's promise. Gave him a look, he told me, of, so what took you so long? And then went into cardiac arrhythmia. He dropped her in the dirt and began to work, got her into a hospital in Addis Ababa, got her on an Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt, got her into a hospital there, worked on her, flew her home, and she's now here, and she listened to what I used to say, because they would crawl up my lap, and they didn't call me Grandpa. I can't stand that name. I was the Papa. And crawl up, and I heard her doing this with another kid, was sitting, and she was holding this little kid, and she's 18 now, and she says, and she had said at one time, we're Irish, aren't we, Papa? And I said, yeah, you're the first black Irish in the family. And she was holding this child, and she said what I told my kids, you know, you're the darling of my heart. You're the apple of my eye. You're the tulip in my tulip basket. You're my lily in the field. You're my wondrous spring morning in the dell with the light coming through the mist, coming down on the water. You're my wondrous creature roaming the face of the earth, and I love you like the breath of life. And she was doing it with an Irish affect, an Ethiopian Irish affect. And so cultivating that in our relationships, in our families, and all of that, really pays off. And I had my son, the oldest one, who's a doctor, come up to me once, and he said, I know what happened to you, because I came out of a family where my twin brother was killed because of family violence. And so turning that corner and coming to this, and boy, I do love that kid with the heat, I'll tell you. But she stole my thing I made up, and I license it, and there's a charge for that. So. But that's, I think, going down in the community and just having that as an ethic. It's almost like you have a sensibility about you that other people will pick up. That there's something, and it's infectious, that we care. And I think that's how we were designed, personally. So.
I'm just going to echo what all of you have said and add just one thing. Don't be afraid of being vulnerable.
Yeah. That's a big one.
That's great. Thank you so much. I have a couple of other questions that we can get to if we have time, but I want to invite any questions from the audience. And so if there are some questions now, I think we have a microphone that we can pass around so that you can get your question in.
Heidi, you had a photo of you standing in front of the wall, the big, tall wall. Well, I think our current president has just said that he's going to go and extend the wall, even though that was kind of a campaign promise that he wasn't going to do that. What do you think changed his mind? What are the pressures on him that would make him do that?
So I have an opinion. Feel free to open this up to other opinions. Honestly, I think it's what we were talking about with power and bias in politics. I think we have an election coming up. So I think a lot of it has to do with it not being about people and it really being about politics. I do believe, and I don't pay attention well enough because I'm just busy in the trenches. But I do believe there was a court case that said it had to continue.
Yep.
Yes.
What there have been responses saying is he had other ways to handle the fact that he had, like, we lost that court case. There are other ways he could have either taken longer or prolonged it or something rather than continue to build the wall. So, and deterrence is not the answer.
Yeah, and in talking about some of those other ways that he could have tried to leverage other legal arguments to try and defer the court order that the construction continues, is to think about ourselves beyond just members of the human species and to recognize other species, because there are an enormous number of environmental regulations that are being violated, and we're not following the appropriate environmental procedures in building the wall at this time. And we need to also think about not just the impact that this has on human migration, but the impact that it has on the migration of other species and the wildlife that lives in the region, and the impact that it's going to have on them, as well as the border communities.
Yeah.
Who, the landowners and the people who are part of that community, and the impact that the negative impact that the wall has on them and their lives and their businesses and things like that. And so I agree, and I want to just tie it into what was said earlier about the fact that, we need to think about ourselves as more than human beings, that we are part of not just a planet, but we are part of a universe.
Yeah.
And that we need to learn how to, coexist in a way that will support the survival of all of us.
There's a beautiful picture that you could look up it was the award-winning bird photo of the year. And if you just Google, like, bird photo, immigration wall, it's a roadrunner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a roadrunner, and he's literally standing and just looking at the wall, kind of like,
What?
I used to be over there, but it has a huge impact.
One of my favorite moments was when I was in Tijuana interviewing children and families who were there under the Remain in Mexico policy. And we were just west of Tijuana towards the Pacific Ocean. And we watched as this adolescent boy threw a giant ladder and a rope to the top of the wall, and would climb over to the other side of the wall, to the U.S. side, and then he would climb back over to the Mexican side. Then he'd climb back over the United States. And it was just like an athletic challenge for him. And I'm thinking, how much did that playground cost us? Because that's what he had turned it into.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I've appreciated your comments about the challenge of not going into the dark places, and I think the message of compassion and the individual cases that give you personal satisfaction and of both accomplishment and making the world a little better place, the importance of having a community or collaboration with others as a way of sustaining your own attacks at the issue. What I'm interested in knowing is whether you have hope in terms of the collective of any substantial change in our institutions, whether it's 5 years, 10 years from now, that things will improve. And if so, what do you see as the path towards that? Aside from running for office or getting down to the border?
I'd say yes to hope, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. And I don't think any of you would be here. And I think what has to happen to make that hope real is we just have to keep showing up, even when we're exhausted and when we're dispirited. And I think that's why the sense of community, because we also need to buttress ourselves by knowing that we're not in this alone. But absolutely hope. Absolutely. And just keep showing up.
The way I see hope, and I always, try to share this with my students, is like the poet Goethe used to say, right? Goethe, and that is that for me, hope is like a star. I can't reach it, and I don't think anybody here can reach it, but I always have to be seeing it because it's my guiding, light. But I have to be very humble. I will not reach the star. Now, from a more concrete way, institutions, and I imagine we're thinking the U.S., but it can be another place. One thing I was sharing with you, we have to break this focus that the solution for a lot of our issues has to be through certain institutions and through the centralized institutions, meaning Washington, D.C. And what we're seeing, even though those of us with a sense of humanity have to confront a lot of policies of exclusion that are coming from states, those policies, regardless of, reminded us that states do have power. So just like we had an Arizona SB 1070, we have an SB 54 in California and other states. So this practice of immigration federalism is really important. And I insist, it's reminding us that this is a federal state. This is not a centralized state. And that the power that states and the peoples of those states have is so immense, but it's basically been focused on, okay, what is happening in Washington? Sometimes you just have to forget what's happening in Washington and look at your local governments and your state governments. And there's so many things that can be done at the local and state level, but we kind of forget it, right? Because many people have been educated to always see the solution in the so-called big institutions in Washington, D.C. So I think that it's the same with Alaska, right? Mm-hmm. You have to work first from your local community in Alaska and then moving forward.
And if I could just put in another plug for that notion and this idea of this welcoming movement that we've seen around the world, that is you're absolutely right. It is based on local action, and then it networks out. So I have been thinking a lot about quantum physics and social justice, and I feel like that when we make changes in our own ways of being and understanding, it does ripple out. And when we connect with each other through our actions and our intentions, we change our universe.
I think that one of the big challenges right now is we have access to so much information, and a large amount of that information is dark because of that fear response that was described earlier, that gets readership. And we have to be very intentional about what we consume, what we expose ourselves to, and to recognize that some of that content will drain our energy, will drain our spirit, will take away that hope that's so critical for us to wake up in the morning with joy and with purpose. And so when you talk about institutions, I wonder, how much of that should be the focus of our efforts, because, as we keep talking about, it's starting with, being loving first thing in the morning and then trying to cultivate those habits throughout the day, no matter where you are and with whom you're interacting. And when you say, oh, but what about that giant institution thousands of miles away, you're going to feel a lack of control, you're going to feel a lack of agency, you're going to feel a certain amount of helplessness. So those institutions are critically important, but it's important for us all to have enough humility to understand that we only have so much control over those institutions. At the same time, if you look at the progress of those institutions across time, you will see measurable progress from where we've been as a nation. And in thinking about that arc of progress, just as President Obama said 7 years ago, that progress is not a straight line. It is jagged.
Yeah, of course.
And we have made so much progress that it is a natural and normal response to have pushback against that progress. So the fact that we start to see a regression should not create a moment of panic for us. It should be a moment of affirmation that we made so much progress that people are pushing back. against that progress, just as they have during other points of history when we've progressed civilization. But our goal should not be to enter into a feeling of despair. We made so much progress and now there is this regression, but rather to limit the extent of that regression so that we can then move even further on the next swing of progress, which will be coming in a short while if we continue to cultivate that engagement and positivity and love and compassion for one another and for humanity and civilization. So don't be depressed if you sometimes see regression in the institutions. Instead, say, okay, that's affirmation that we were moving in the right direction. Now let's limit the regression and continue to push us towards more progress.
I agree completely. If you look at the history of our species, there are all sorts of events that happen that we should have gotten creamed. I mean, we are a delicious food group for all sorts of animals, but we managed to get up to this point. And when I think Blake says, life delights in life, well, we have looked at how we were in centuries past and when we were burning witches and all this stuff and watch ourselves go. And we do that jagged move because when you get that pushback, you know you're making progress, because if you weren't, they wouldn't complain. And we have access to so much information, knowledge, that 400 years ago, they would have just died to understand how things work, microorganisms, communication, and so forth. And some people I know are saying that we're becoming a new species because of the harnessing of all this energy and machines that do stuff that we used to do and so on, and what is happening to our brains such that we would come up with something, little thing like this that does all the things this does. This is an absolute miracle. So I agree. When they get pushback, I just say, oh, we must be doing something right, because the hardness that is in humans is going to fight for its life. And we get past, another Blake quote was, we get past those mind-forged manacles, the self-imposed limits that we push ourselves on. So you may pick up on a little enthusiastic about this, but I think we're in the start of something just terrific. And what's disappointing to me, the most disappointing thing is that I'm not 22 to get to be in the way up next part.
I want to make sure we get this one more question in because we're running out of time.
You know, I think DACA, the program, is really at risk, and it puts a lot of kids at risk. And I think I really appreciated your talk, Mara, because you were talking about economics and what are we leaving on the table, and like what kind of brilliance are we just like eclipsing? And so could you guys talk about like what can we do for DACA? Maybe what can we do, William, outside of the box, because it's a federal program, but what can we do for DACA recipients? So that's my question.
Just a quick reminder, and my attorney colleagues will, reinstate this. DACA doesn't give any immigration status. It's deferring. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's start with the name. It's deferring, basically, deportation. Right? So it's deferring an action, right, of which the outcome would be deportation. So even though it is somewhat positive, kind of like the sanctuary city issue that's very controversial, right? So yes, it can give them some oxygen, to keep studying, to keep working, but it is, again, if it does not enter the realm of codification, right, and is anchored with those rights and obligations, it can, and the threat has always been there. It's happening as we speak right now, by the way, right? Again, it's like, no, it's not constitutional, so there we go again. It can disappear when we take our flights tomorrow back. I mean, that's the reality. So there's an enormous amount of work to be done. There's been a fatigue, and I've worked with a lot of these young people. Because of going back to Mexico, there's been a fatigue that is starting to crack the system, where young, at least Mexican people under DACA are starting to just go back to Mexico. They're done. And they've been living here for most of their life, right? 15, 20 years. And they're saying, se acabó, I'm done, estoy cansado. And now there's actually reintegration programs in Mexico that are occurring to say, well, come back, right? So I don't want to take too much space from my colleagues that deal with the technicalities of it, but wow, it's one of those programs that, the president tried to do the best he could at the same time that, he had to, by law, deport the enormous amount of people, more than 2 million people, as he was doing it.
So DACA is the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, for people who don't know, and it was a status that was established under President Obama, where, you have kids who are brought across the border before they even have any memory of it, and all of a sudden they turn 16 and they say to their parents, I want to go get my driver's license, and the parents have to tell them, unfortunately, you don't have any legal status in the United States. So President Obama issued an executive order to allow for people to stay temporarily, as long as they were in good standing in school or in a job or in the military, I think.
Yes, correct.
And it's been litigated all over the place, and there was just a recent federal court decision that said no. And the thing is we have this all the time. We have also temporary protected status, which, again, during the Central American Wars, so many people, and people, again, would be surprised at how many Central Americans are in Alaska, but people came up fleeing the civil wars, and they were given temporary protected status, and they were here in that status for 20 years, building lives and families, and again, part of our economy and part of our communities. And thankfully, the rug was not pulled out from under that constituency, because we had a bill in 1997 that allowed some Central Americans to be able to stay in the U.S. Finally, this is from 1997 all the way back to the 70s and 80s, looking at the impacts of the Central American Wars. And now, President Biden just gave Venezuelans temporary protected status, and then in the next breath, he said, we're going to be deporting Venezuelans. And he did that exactly because of the dynamic that we've talked about, which is you ease up and you're, as an executive branch, you ease up and you're fearful of a whole bunch of people coming. And so the immediate next step was, we're going to deport everybody anyway. So it is so unsettling for our community to face this, and the real, I think, difficult part of DACA is these are kids. Again, this is before the child migrant crisis that you had described, but these are kids who are here through no, I don't even want to use the word fault, but through no choice of their own, and have been growing up thinking that they were U.S. citizens by and large, and so all of a sudden they're going to be wasted.
And let me be selfish for a second.
Yeah.
Think about the billions of dollars that we've invested in these young people, because they're part of our community. They've gone to our schools. They are, if you look at analyses of this population, they are higher educated. They get better grades. They are more compliant with laws than citizen children. And so we have this, this immensely talented and well-educated group of young people who love this country and want to continue to be a part of this country. And our country has accepted them and invested in them. And we want to give them so much instability that it creates a psychological crisis for them in not having stability for more than 2 years at a time, such that they would rather go to Mexico, where they know that they can build lives, and we lose that investment that we've made in them. So from a selfish perspective, it is self-destructive, for us nationally to give up in this generation that we've invested in.
So, and I would just to say the answer is for Congress to do its job.
Yeah, well, of course.
So we just have a few seconds left, just so I can kind of honor the time commitment we made. I want to turn to each of you and just ask, kind of to bring everything together at the end, what one word would you choose to end this forum with? If you could choose one word, what would it be? And we'll start at the far end with Warren.
3 words, be the light.
Thank you.
Hope.
Indignant.
Love.
Awakening, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for an incredible discussion. Thank you for your presentations, for coming to Juneau. I think this was a very powerful discussion and a very powerful set of talks. And I think it really brings to light the mission of the World Affairs Council, which is to bring the world to Juneau. So please thank our speakers, our presenters, for the wisdom that they have brought. Thank you.
That was a panel discussion with Professor Warren Binford, Dr. William Arrocha, Heidi Cerneka, Ari Cowan, and Dr. Mara Kimmel. It was recorded October 14th, 2023 at UAS on the unceded territories of the Aquan on Tlinke Ani as part of the 2023 Juneau World Affairs Forum, Immigration, Detention, and Power, Addressing Bias and Prejudice. Produced by KTOO and the Juneau World Affairs Council in partnership with the University of Alaska Southeast, with support from Poor Alaska Kensington Mine and Ramada by Wyndham.